Who among the dead remembers the name of the one who will return? So began the fragment, etched into a blackened reliquary recovered from a world long since slain by time. Its words seeped like cold mist into the minds of those who dared read it, speaking of a warrior lost yet unbroken. Across the vaulted silence of the eternal war, the prophecy stirred once more. It whispered of Captain Titus, a son of Ultramar, forged in duty, tempered in defiance, whose shadow had not fully vanished into history's mausoleum. And as forgotten stars guttered in the void, the Imperium trembled with the faint echo of approaching steps. For something ancient was waking, drawn by the scent of demons and the blood of empires. A return had begun, though none yet realized what price such a resurrection would demand. In the ash-choked halls of Grifo's Prime, where statues of saints lay cracked beneath centuries of bombardment, the chronicles of the Adeptus Ministorum shifted unnaturally, as though parchment could feel anticipation. Priests muttered prayers with shaking hands, sensing a change in the cosmic tide. Tales of a warrior falsely accused, cleansed by battle, and reforged by Primaris ascension, whispered from shrine to shrine. Titus was no myth, not here, not now. Yet the return of a hero was never a blessing freely given. The God Emperor's realm had learned too many times that salvation walked hand in hand with catastrophe. As the last bells tolled in the heretic storm outside, a nameless archivist paused mid-scripture, hearing footsteps echoing where no living soul stood. Hope and dread intertwined, indistinguishable in the charged air, as though destiny itself inhaled before speaking his name. Beyond the brittle veil of reality, the Imperium heaved with violent hunger. Demons clawed at the thinning barrier that separated them from the mortal plane, drawn by an awakening they could not yet define. Somewhere in that roiling madness, whispers of Titus's return twisted into shapes of mockery and fear. The warp remembered him, the defiant mortal who dared spill the blood of chaos champions, who bore the Emperor's wrath like a mantle instead of a weight. Now the warp recoiled, for the Primaris reborn carried more than Jinrot's strength, carried an unfinished oath, one that had echoed into the deep places of unreality. The demons hissed and retreated, knowing that oaths, once rekindled, reshaped fate. And the eternal war trembled, sensing a player long absent stepping once more into an arena soaked with ancient sins. Upon the deck of the battle barge Requital of Dawn, the void hummed with restrained violence. Servitors clicked and whispered, their hollow eyes flickering as if haunted by visions not their own. The ship's chaplain knelt beside a stasis chamber wreathed in protective scriptures, each letter burned into the armor glass with sacred fire. Inside lay a figure whose presence bent the air with silent authority. Titus slept the engineered slumber of the Primaris, suspended between death and renewed purpose. Though inert, he radiated the memory of worlds saved and comrades mourned. The chaplain's voice trembled as he chanted litanies of awakening, sensing something stirring beneath the gene-forged calm, something older than any doctrine had prepared him for. As the last prayer faded, the stasis field shivered. Titus's hand twitched, fingers closing as if around an unseen sword forged from prophecy. Far below the starlines, on the scorched plains of Arden Ix, the remnants of an imperial regiment marched in grim silence. They had fought for years without reinforcement, surviving only through ritual stubbornness and the whispered belief that a forgotten hero would come. When the heavens split open with the thunder of drop pods, the soldiers froze as blue-armored giants descended like vengeful constellations. Among them stood Titus, emerging from ceramite dust and fire, his helm held beneath one arm, his eyes carrying the cold serenity of a resurrected oath. Survivors dropped to their knees, unsure whether they faced salvation or judgment. Titus looked over them, neither smiling nor scowling, only measuring. The eternal war had changed these mortals, bending them into shapes forged by desperation. He wondered briefly what shape it had carved into him. Reports of Titus's presence spread through the subsector like forbidden scripture. Some worlds celebrated with frantic devotion, hailing the return of a living saint who had survived betrayal, censure, and the transforming fires of Primaris ascension. Others issued silence decrees, fearing what his reappearance implied, old wounds reopening, secrets clawing free from the coffins they'd been buried in. The Inquisition listened closely, weighing possibilities as carefully as they weighed guilt. For a warrior who had once walked the fault line between purity and damnation, A second life demanded explanation. In the hidden cloisters of Ordo Xenos, murmurs swelled that Titus carried knowledge he should not possess, yet none dared confront him. The shadows around his name were too deep, too intertwined with fate's unseen hand. The galaxy's breath hitched, awaiting proof of either his redemption or its opposite. As war returned to Ardent 9, Titus strode through the shattered cathedra where Imperial banners hung in tatters soaked with the blood of martyrs. He traced one gauntlet hand across a cracked stone depicting the Emperor's gaze, feeling the tremor of something vast pulsing beneath reality's skin. The dead whispered here, not metaphorically, but with the faint psychic residue of souls torn too quickly from their bodies. Their final moments clung to the air like frost. A lesser mind would have faltered, but Titus accepted their burden without hesitation. He had walked this path before, guided by sacrifice and vengeance alike. The ground quaked as Chaos war engines approached, their arrival heralded by metallic wails. Titus drew his blade, its power field snarling awake, and the cathedral's shadows recoiled. The battle to come felt preordained, written long before he took his first breath. Steel clashed, earth split, and firestorms rolled across the horizon. Titus moved through the chaos with merciless precision, every strike a reminder that the Emperor's wrath could wear many faces. The foes he met were twisted by the warp, their flesh sculpted into mockeries of life, yet something about them felt Sochim, as though they sought him specifically, driven by a command whispered from beyond mortal understanding. The largest of the abominations thundered toward him, a demonic thing wearing stolen armor, bearing a brand etched in burning runes. Titus recognized it, a symbol he had once seen on a world consumed by treachery, a symbol tied to his own downfall. Rage hummed beneath his discipline, but he crushed it. He fought not for vengeance, but for the oaths that survived his transformation. When the last monstrosity crumbled into ash, the battlefield fell into a suffocating quiet. Imperial survivors gathered hesitantly around Titus, their armor battered, their souls flickering like candles in a storm. One sergeant approached, clutching a relic torn from the corpse of the branded demon, a data shard, glowing with corrupted runes. Titus took it, feeling a cold pulse run through his armor as the device recognized him. It projected a brief, flickering image, a hooded figure speaking to unseen legions, declaring Titus's return not as salvation, but as catalyst. The message dissolved into static before identification could be gleaned. The soldiers watched Titus in fearful silence, sensing a weight shift in the unseen architecture of fate. Titus said nothing. He only stared at the sky, seeing constellations misaligned by imperceptible degrees. Aboard the Requital of Dawn, storm shields glowed with erratic light as the ship drifted through a region of space known for devouring entire fleets. Titus stood on the Strategium balcony, observing spectral shapes slide along the edges of reality. They were not ships, not demons, but echoes of something older, something studying him. The shipmaster muttered that warp tides reacted as though they recognized Titus's genetic signature, but such a thing was impossible. Even so, the Imperium pulsed in synchronized rhythm with his heartbeat. Titus felt neither fear nor pride, only inevitability. The chaplain approached, voicing concern that their course, and perhaps their fates, were no longer their own. Titus did not disagree. For the first time since his resurrection, he wondered if his return had been orchestrated by a force beyond even the Emperor's light. They made orbit above a nameless world unmarked on Imperial charts, yet clearly bearing the scars of ancient conflict. Monoliths jutted from the surface like the bones of a titanic creature, each carved with sigils neither human nor Xenos. Something about this place resonated with Titus's memories, ones he did not recall earning. As he led his strike force through the dust-laden valleys, the monoliths reacted, glowing faintly at his passing. Warriors whispered in discomfort, clutching their weapons tighter. Titus approached the largest structure where a circular aperture pulsed like a slumbering eye. He sensed the presence behind it, vast, patient, familiar, not ally, not foe. Something worse, a watcher. When the aperture opened, no light emerged, only cold recognition. The ground trembled as a voice seeped from the darkness, neither spoken nor heard, but felt directly within the marrow of every living being present. It addressed Titus by a name he had never heard, yet instinctively feared a name older than his lineage. Older than Ultramar, older than mankind's claim to the stars. His warriors recoiled, some collapsing beneath the mental weight. But Titus stood unmoving, his armor trembling with a resonance he could not suppress. The unseen voice welcomed him back, as though greeting a prodigal instrument of forgotten design. Then as the aperture slowly closed, a final whisper brushed against the edge of perception, a promise or a threat or both. Titus turned away, concealing the flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. Something had remembered him. Something he was never meant to remember in return. The echoes of that nameless world lingered in Titus's mind like a stain that could not be washed from memory. As the requital of dawn ascended from its orbit, the crew felt a tremor beneath their prayers, a subtle distortion in their faith, as if the Emperor himself had turned his gaze aside. Some whispered that the monoliths had judged them. Others feared they had awakened something too ancient to categorize as foe or ally. Titus remained silent, yet in the solitude of his meditation chamber, he sensed the whisper persist, a thread of recognition woven into the marrow of his being. It followed him through prayer, through breath, through thought, until he found himself wondering whether the Imperium's truth was a fortress, or a cage built around a forgotten lie. The chaplain knelt before the ship's relic shrine, reciting litanies meant to steel the spirit against heretical doubt. Yet his voice cracked. The visions he had glimpsed on the planet's surface haunted him, titanic figures veiled in dust. Watching with patient indifference, their presence older than humanity's rise. He questioned whether they were Xenos, demons, or something entirely outside the known order. When he confessed such doubts to the ecclesiarchy envoys aboard, they responded with brittle smiles, hiding fear behind ritual confidence. Faith was not merely belief, it was armor, and now his armor had cracked. In the unseen corridors of the ship, doubts multiplied like spores, drifting from mind to mind. Among the mortal soldiery, fear took on new, intimate forms. Veterans whispered of Titus's unwavering composure in the monolith's presence, interpreting it as either saintly resolve or unspoken corruption. Some praised him as chosen by the Emperor. Others feared he was chosen by something else. Squad leaders argued in hushed tones, trying to silence rumors before they spread, but soldiers fighting a perpetual war had long learned to trust instinct over doctrine. When lights flickered in the barracks, shadows stretching too long and bending at unnatural angles, even the bravest hesitated to speak Titus's name aloud. It felt like invoking a prophecy whose meaning they had never asked to know. In the stratageum, ranking officers debated their course with the sharp politeness of men afraid to name the true threat at hand. Astartes had reported disturbances across the subsector, psychic static shaped like a pulse, repeating Titus's genetic signature. It was impossible, forbidden even to consider, yet the readings spread across star charts like infection points. The shipmaster suggested reporting directly to the Ordo Astartes. The Master of Sanctity countered that such a report could doom Titus before inquiry even began. The political theater of the Imperium had sharp teeth, and some wounds were inflicted not by enemies but by allies who feared uncomfortable truths. The officers reached no consensus, merely prayed their indecision would not prove fatal. Titus, unable to ignore the weight pressing upon him, visited the apothecarian to undergo a full genetic scrutiny. The servitors hummed and scanned, their instruments scrying every encoded secret in his gene seed. The results, when displayed, bore an anomaly so faint it nearly escaped notice, a resonance pattern woven through his Primaris organs, identical to the signals radiating from the monolith world. It pulsed like a heartbeat. The chief apothecary insisted it must be a data error. Titus doubted that, stared at the diagram of his own biology, and felt the whisper return, curling through his thoughts with unnerving familiarity. Was he truly reborn by the will of Guilliman? Or merely repurposed by something unseen? In the quiet sanctum of the astropathic choir, psychic chanting faltered. One by one, the blind servants of the Emperor sensed a presence brushing against their minds, a presence that was both luminous and cold, holy and profane. They recoiled, screaming fragments of a message that refused to resolve into clarity. Some shouted Titus's name. Others accused him of carrying a signal meant to guide an unknown intelligence across the stars. The choir mistress purged the chamber with sacred fire, fearing corruption, yet the echoes persisted long after the flames died. The inquisitorial observer assigned to the ship recorded everything with impassive calm, already drafting a report that might damn an entire company. Meanwhile, the surviving soldiers of Arden Ix slept uneasily in their quarters, tormented by dreams of two shadows walking side by side, one shaped like Titus, the other like an unformed echo of him. In these visions, the two figures diverged along a shattered causeway, one path bathed in the Emperor's radiance, the other swallowed by an abyss of silent, watchful eyes. When the troops awoke, they found symbols etched onto their armor, carved as though by invisible blades, matching sigils to those seen on the monoliths. The ship's artificers confirmed no human tool could have wrought them. Fear took root, and from fear, devotion begins to fracture. The ecclesiarch envoy, alarmed by the spreading unease, convened a sermon meant to restore unity. Yet the preacher's voice rang hollow. He proclaimed Titus a vessel of divine will, chosen for an unknown purpose hidden within sacred mystery. But when asked, trembling, what to make of the unnatural symbols spreading aboard the vessel, he hesitated. That moment of hesitation shattered something fragile. For in the Imperium, certainty is salvation, and doubt is heresy. Enraged zealots from among the crew demanded Titus explain himself. Others protected him, convinced that attacking him would invite ruin. Faith, once a single flame, now split into competing fires. The inquisitorial observer finally revealed his hand, summoning Titus to a clandestine interrogation chamber deep within the ship's spine. The questions were sharp, designed to wound. Did he hear the voice? Did he feel a pull toward that nameless world? Did he know why ancient structures responded to him? Titus answered with disciplined restraint, but even he could not deny the unexplainable resonance within. The observer concluded that Titus might be compromised, not by chaos, but by something far older and equally unacceptable. He recommended containment. The chamber's lumen lamps flickered, buzzing like insects ready to swarm. Word of the Inquisition's suspicion spread like wildfire through the lower decks, twisting into elaborate conspiracies. Some claimed Titus hid forbidden knowledge. Others believed the Inquisitors served dark motives, seeking to extinguish a rising savior. Skirmishes erupted in maintenance tunnels between loyalists and dissenters. Blood was spilled in the name of interpretations whispered only hours before. The ship, a fortress built for war, had become a battleground of beliefs. And still, the strange pulse beneath reality echoed through every bulkhead, growing stronger with each cycle. In a moment of rare vulnerability, Titus sought counsel from the chaplain. The warrior priest confessed that he, too, heard the whisper, not as corruption, but as memory. A memory that felt older than their species. He questioned aloud whether the Emperor's truth was but a fragment of a larger, concealed whole. Titus felt no anger, only recognition. Both men understood that speaking such thoughts aloud was treason, and yet silence now felt like another form of betrayal. They prayed together, knowing the prayer could not shield them from what was coming. The final fracture came without warning, as the requital of dawn approached its next waypoint. A colossal signal erupted from the void, a signal identical to the resonance encoded within Titus's gene seed. It overrode all systems, flooding every Vox channel with a single, impossible image. Titus himself, standing upon a world of black stone, speaking to an unseen congregation in a language older than warp and void alike. Except he was here aboard the ship, alive, silent, watching the projection of his own impossible double. And in that moment, certainty died. The image of the impossible double lingered across every lumen panel aboard the requital of dawn, burning itself into memory like a brand pressed to the soul. In the aftermath, silence suffocated the corridors. Warriors muttered prayers not to strengthen faith, but to prevent it from shattering altogether. Titus felt the weight of countless gazes, awe, fear, accusation, yet beneath all that, something deeper stirred within him, recognition tinged with dread. That mirrored figure, robed in shadowed authority, had spoken in a language he did not know, yet understood in the marrow of his reborn frame. Each syllable felt like a recalled dream, a truth buried and sealed before humanity crawled from Terra's cradle. And though he fought to steady his breath, the whisper returned, coiling like a serpent through his consciousness, telling him that the projection was not prophecy, but memory. The chaplain secluded himself in the shrine chamber, kneeling beneath the fractured glow of relic candles. His litanies faltered as he replayed the vision in his mind. Was it heresy or revelation? Had they not long been taught that visions of doubles were deceptions of the warp? Yet this felt older, heavier, shaped not by madness but by intention. He feared that faith had become too brittle to withstand what was coming. Even as he clutched his Crozius tight enough to crack ceramite, he felt the Emperor's presence flicker like a guttering flame. Across the chamber's gilded walls, the shadows deepened, shifting with a will not their own. He whispered a confession no warrior should ever utter, that he no longer knew whether he prayed to the truth or the most exquisite lie ever built. In the lower decks, the mortal soldiers broke under the strain of visions they could not comprehend. Some gouged imperial symbols into their skin, desperate to anchor themselves to the creed they feared was slipping. Others wept silently, unable to reconcile the image of a beloved hero standing as an oracle of something not written in the sacred histories. A young sergeant, trembling, wrote her last testament into a battered data slate, a confession of doubt. She spoke of a shadow behind Titus's gaze, a depth no human should possess. She pleaded for the Emperor's forgiveness, not for her fear, but for the possibility that fear had become wisdom. When she sealed the message, the lights around her dimmed, and she felt a presence pass like a cold hand over her heart. The inquisitorial observer prepared his report in grim silence, every word written with the precision of a blade. He was taught to fear no truth, yet what he had seen defied the binary categories of purity and corruption. Titus was not possessed, not tainted, not manipulated by chaos, but neither was he merely what the Imperium had made. He was something new, or rather something old, resurrected in new flesh. The observer contemplated the possibility that the Primaris process itself had awakened locked genetic memories, relics predating human empire. If so, then Titus was a key to a vault no one alive remembered sealing. And if the key had already been turned, and the galaxy trembled on the brink of an inheritance it was never meant to claim. In the Apothecarian, the chief apothecary dissected the anomaly in Titus's gene seed with mounting horror. The resonance was no warp taint. It had structure, design, intention. Patterns spiraled in symmetrical sequences, reminiscent of long-lost pre-imperial sciences. As he probed deeper, he saw echoes of Titan-wrought craftsmanship, but intertwined with something alien to every known archive. He realized with a chill that the anomaly was not an infection, it was an activation. Titus, in some fashion, had been awakened. When he cross-referenced the readings with ancient, redacted data vaults, a single phrase appeared repeatedly: progenitor echo protocols. He tried to access further, but the archive locked him out, requesting a clearance level no living human possessed. Amid these revelations, the ship drifted through a star system where every planet was stripped to bare stone. It had once housed a thriving culture, human or Xenos. No one knew, but now only dust remained, scattered into atomic husks. Titus's presence agitated the Auspex arrays. They lit with spectral images, faint silhouettes of impossible architecture. He stared into the void, seeing faint glimmers of towers that vanished when observed. They felt familiar. Too familiar. Memory tugged at him, not from his life as an Astartes, but from something buried deeper. Wondered to his own horror if he was remembering a world he had never lived on. The ecclesiarchy envoy gathered the faithful crew for a sermon meant to quell dread, yet his voice faltered as he spoke of divine purpose and tested devotion. Behind his eyes, doubt gnawed like a starving beast. Every scripture suddenly felt insufficient, flimsy against the cosmic implications unfolding around them. Faith, once steel, now clanged like hollow tin. He spoke of Titus as a chosen instrument, but trembled at the thought that, chosen by whom, had become a question too dangerous to voice. And when a vision overtook him mid-sentence, the double of Titus standing upon a throne of obsidian light, he collapsed, screaming until his throat bled. Skirmishes erupted as factions hardened aboard the ship. Some believed Titus heralded a suppressed chapter of holy truth. Others claimed his existence threatened the Imperium's ideological foundation. Tension frothed into violence. Bulkheads stained with blood, Voxcaster sermons drowned by firefights. Titus intervened only when mortal lives teetered on pointless destruction. His voice alone silenced entire compartments, yet even his authority no longer united. They feared him, revered him, suspected him, and none of these were safe emotions. Every time he tried to speak reassurance, that whisper curled behind his words, shaping his tone into something otherworldly. The astropaths attempted to trace the source of the cosmic signal. They reached into the warp, seeking clarity, but found instead a structure, a psychic edifice vast as a dead god. And woven throughout its architecture was the unmistakable echo of Titus's signature. The sight shattered to seers instantly, their minds folded like ruptured parchment. The survivors whispered of a precursor throne, a seat built for a being not of chaos, nor of humanity, but of something parallel. Their final message, delivered in shaking voices, was simple. He has returned to the wrong age. The chaplain confronted Titus in a moment, heavy with sorrow. He admitted the truth he had long feared, that the Emperor's dominion was not the only grand design shaping reality. Something else had walked before mankind, something that had left imprints in genetics, architecture, memory, and myth. And Titus, through resurrection and circumstance, had stepped into that imprint like a shadow returning to its source. Titus wished to deny it, but the whisper rose once more, merging with his heartbeat until he could not tell where he ended and it began. The requital of dawn reached the edge of an uncharted nebula, one shaped unnervingly like the sigil etched across the ship's bulkheads. As the vessel crossed its threshold, reality shuddered. Space folded like fabric, revealing a colossal construct hidden between dimensions, a cathedral of impossible geometry, older than the Imperium and colder than the void. Its gates opened, responding not to the ship but to Titus. Every warrior felt the shift. They clutched their weapons, some praying, some screaming, and Titus changed. His eyes darkened, pupils dilating into slitted geometries as the whisper finally spoke with his own voice layered beneath. At last, the air awakens. Part 3 ends as Titus steps forward, neither wholly himself nor wholly other, while the construct welcomes him home. The construct's gates yawned wider as Titus stepped into the threshold, his silhouette fractured by shifting currents of pale geometric light. Behind him, the warriors of the Requital of Dawn hesitated, torn between oaths sworn and truths they could no longer deny. Some reached for him as if to pull a brother back from the precipice. Others raised their weapons, ready to die, preventing a transformation they feared would birth a calamity older than humanity's first breath. Titus felt their turmoil as the whisper inside him unraveled further. It did not command, it remembered, and through it he felt echoes of an age when galaxies bowed to an order predating the Emperor himself. The knowledge made him stagger. The weight of it was a crown woven from extinction, yet somewhere beneath the rising tide of alien memory, a faint ember of mortal loyalty still burned. The chaplain followed him to the edge of the abyss, grief driving his steps more than faith. He knew the moment unfolding before him would fracture every catechism, every scripture etched into his skull. Yet his devotion to Titus, to the warrior he had shepherded, chastised, and blessed, anchored him against the dread gnawing at his soul. He called Titus's name, but the echo came back wrong, split in two, one voice human, the other vibrating with the timbre of forgotten empires. The chaplain's spirit quaked. He prayed, not for deliverance, but for clarity, for a sign that the warrior before him was still capable of choosing righteousness, even as the universe tried to rewrite him. Aboard the ship, the crew felt the construct's awakening as a vibration in their bones, a tremor that rearranged thoughts like pieces on a game board. Memories blurred, certainties cracked. A sergeant who once clung to faith now saw visions of humanity as a fleeting afterthought in an endless chain of unfinished designs. She pressed her forehead against the cold steel of a bulkhead and begged the Emperor to anchor her mind. When no answer came, she wept, not out of despair, but out of the crushing truth that devotion offered no shield from a universe indifferent to mortal suffering. And still, despite everything, she rose when the alarms blared, driven by duty that survived where faith faltered. The inquisitorial observer watched the unfolding phenomenon with a scholar's horror. His data slate recorded fractal signatures emanating from the construct, each one rewriting its own code faster than human cognition could track. He realized, with sickening clarity, that the Imperium's greatest sin might not have been ignorance, but active erasure. Some ancient authority had been hidden deliberately, methodically, and Titus's awakening threatened to drag it back into the light. The observer's duty was clear. Should Titus cease to be a servant of mankind, he must be ended. Yet as he tightened his grip around his execution pistol, he found his resolve trembling. To kill Titus now would be to sever the thread of a mystery too vast to comprehend. To let him live might doom them all. In the Apothecarion, the chief apothecary studied the cascading genetic transformations rippling through Titus's last submitted scans. They were not mutations, they were alignments. Patterns converging toward perfection not defined by humanity's gene artisans. He slammed his fist against the console, suddenly furious at the betrayal embedded in his craft. They had believed themselves masters of the human form, sculptors of gods. But Titus's metamorphosis exposed them as children tinkering with relics they did not understand. He whispered an apology to the gene seed vault, as if the honored progenitors could hear him. He prayed that his failure to foresee this would not damn the souls of the entire company. Outside the ship, the nebula churned like a wounded beast. Celestial storms bent around the construct as though acknowledging the return of a long-banished sovereign. Warp currents flattened into unnatural stillness, and for a brief moment, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Titus felt that pause in the fabric of creation, sensing a door opening inside his mind. One step deeper, and he feared he would lose the last fragments of who he had been. Captain Titus, Astartes of Ultramar, servant of the Emperor. But as the alien memories pressed harder, he clenched his fists, resisting the pull. Humanity had given him purpose. He would not surrender that purpose even as revelation twisted around him like a noose. The ecclesiarchy envoy clung to the ship's chapel altar, trembling as visions overwhelmed him. He saw the Emperor not as a god, but as a warrior king, defying impossible odds, a mortal ascending through will, not destiny. In those visions, he saw titanic figures that predated even the Emperor's rise, shaping the early galaxy in silence. They resembled Titus's double. They resembled commanders. When the visions finally released him, he lay gasping, bleeding tears, his faith shattered and reforged into something quieter, harsher, more intimate. He understood now that devotion could not rely on certainty, only on choice. And he feared the choice Titus faced was one no mortal or demigod could make without damning something sacred. Civil war simmered aboard the requital of dawn as factions drew their lines. Some rallied to Titus, convinced his awakening meant ascension. Others believed he had become a weapon belonging to forces hostile to the Imperium. A firefight ignited near the primary hangar, gunfire echoing like thunder through steel arteries of the ship. Titus sensed every life lost as a faint thread snapping in his mind. He felt their oaths unravel, their hopes extinguish, their prayers dissipate. Rage surged within him, not the wrath of an Astartes, but something deeper, older, all-consuming. With a thought, the construct answered. A pulse of alien force washed outward, freezing combatants mid-strike, leaving them staring in terror at the unseen hand that had halted their fury. The astropaths, driven near madness by the construct's psychic resonance, gathered in silent formation, compelled by an instinct they could not name. They raised their hands toward the nebula, their blind eyes reflecting the shape of the cathedral-like structure. In perfect unison, they spoke a single phrase. The air approaches the fulcrum. Then their bodies convulsed as a torrent of visions flooded them. Stars, dying in patterns that resembled runic sigils, empires erased with clinical precision, a throne awaiting a figure shaped like Titus, but far beyond him. When they collapsed, the choir mistress realized with horror that their minds had been aligned to a design not of human origin. The chaplain finally reached Titus, placing a trembling hand upon his armored shoulder. He begged him, not as a superior, not as a priest, but as a brother, to resist whatever sought to claim him. Titus turned, his face a war between identities, his eyes flickering between humanity and the alien geometry, imprinting itself upon his mind. He whispered that he could feel a truth within the construct, one so profound it threatened to unmake him. The chaplain swore that even if the galaxy had lied to them all, there was still honor in choosing who to be. For a moment, the human light in Titus's gaze flickered brighter, but then the construct spoke. A voice vibrated across dimensions, resonating through flesh, steel, and soul. The sequence nears completion. The heir must reclaim the origin throne. A beam of light speared outward, enveloping Titus, rewriting the air around him. His form elongated, restructured, armored plates bending like liquid to reveal sigils that no human tongue could name. His shadow stretched across the deck, splitting into impossible patterns. And just as the transformation reached its crescendo, Titus screamed. Not in pain, in defiance. Part 4 ends there, with destiny held in a single, trembling breath. From the dying echo of Part 4, the galaxy inhales a final, trembling breath, as though even the void braces for what must now unfold. The storm that has stalked the edges of every prophecy finally unfurls its wounded wings, casting a shadow that stretches from the golden throne to the bleeding frontiers where nameless warriors perish in silence. Captain Titus advances through that trembling dark, each footfall a vow reforged, each heartbeat the drum of a destiny he no longer trusts. Around him, the air quivers with the oily shimmer of warp-born omens, and across the blasted wastes march those who have followed him despite doubt, despite despair, despite the unspoken fear that their faith has become a brittle, dying thing. Yet still they march, gripping devotion like a blade with no hilt, cutting themselves with every step in the hope that sacrifice might still matter beneath a broken sky. The battlefield opens like a wound before them, an expanse of shattered spires and molten stone where the shadows of God's duel unseen. Here the chorus of the dead whispers in fractured hymns, recounting sins too ancient to bear remembering. Titus feels their voices press against the edges of his mind, testing the cracks left by prophecy and betrayal, searching for purchase within the scars of a Primaris reborn in uncertain purpose. He answers them with silence, for no mortal nor post-human tongue can soothe the restless echoes of 10,000 doomed ages. His warriors advance beside him, blades drawn, eyes ablaze with the stubborn refusal to collapse beneath the universe's cruelty. And far above, the storm breaks at last, disgorging a torrent of warp lightning that paints their armor in argent fire, as though anointing them for a final judgment they did not choose. From within that storm descends the enemy whose name has rotted in forbidden records. A presence older than the Imperium, older even than humanity's first breath beneath alien stars. It takes form in coils of living shadow, its voice a dirge that slithers into the marrow of the faithful, promising freedom from the tyranny of devotion and the burden of purpose. Titus meets its gaze, or the semblance of one, and feels a lifetime of discipline fracture beneath the revelation that he has faced this darkness before, long ago, in fragments of memory locked away by powers he dared not question. The creature hisses with amusement, sensing his doubt, knowing that the greatest weapon against a servant of the Emperor is not blade nor corruption, but the quiet terror of remembering the lies that shaped him. His gauntlets tighten, his oath trembles, the storm howls. The clash ignites with a violence that rends the air. Bolter fire screams through the void-choked haze. Blades of cerulean energy carve through warp shadows that bleed unnatural light. Titus hurls himself into combat with a roar that carries the fury of 1,000 fallen brothers. The creature meets him not with strength but with memory, lashing his mind with visions of ancient councils, secret chambers in which genlines were altered, and destinies rewritten by hands that believed themselves divine. Each blow he strikes reverberates with the contradiction of valor built upon deception. Each wound he suffers whispers the names of those who died, believing the myths he once held sacred. His breath is raw thunder, his conviction flickers like a dying lumen, yet still he battles, carving truth from lies with every desperate stroke. Around them, the battle becomes a vortex of ruin. Sergeants fall reciting litanies that dissolve into coughs of blood. Chaplains chant broken catechisms, their voices trembling with the fear that their relics no longer answer them. Dreadnought collapses in a thunder of failing servos. Jezo Corfix, leaking the last laments of a hero who has known nothing but war for 1,000 years. Still the storm rages, warping reality, bending time into looping screams. And through it, Titus presses on, refusing surrender, even as his thoughts begin to fray at the edges. The creature recoils, sensing something rising within him, not purity, not certainty, but the grim, defiant will of a warrior who has seen truth and chosen battle regardless. The ground shatters beneath them as the warp surges. Titus is thrown into a chasm littered with fractured statues of forgotten saints. He drags himself from the rubble, coughing shards of dust and blood, and stares at the relics that surround him. Each broken face bears the same expression: sorrow, not triumph; regret, not sanctity. He understands then that the Imperium was built atop grief as much as glory, forged not only by heroes but by prisoners of hope who sacrificed everything simply because the alternative was surrender to despair. The realization steadies him, it gives him shape, reminds him that righteousness is not the reward of the unbroken, but the duty of the scarred. He rises once more, oath renewed not by pristine faith, but by acceptance of the Imperium's imperfect human burden. The creature descends after him, fury twisting its shape. Warp fire coils around its limbs, distorting the air with the promise of oblivion. It offers Titus one last chance to walk away, to abandon the lie of loyalty, to free himself from the empire that used him as a pawn in a war it barely comprehends. For a heartbeat, he hesitates. The faces of fallen brothers flicker through his mind. The weight of deception presses upon his armor like a mountain. But then the memory of their resolve, their stubborn, bleeding hope, floods through him. He answers not with words, but with a charge that cracks the stone beneath his boots. His blade arcs in a sweep of unyielding brilliance, and the storm screams as though wounded. Their duel becomes a hymn of destruction. Titus fights with the strength of the Imperium's last, ragged breath. The creature counters with the wrath of forgotten galaxies. Every strike tears cracks in reality, scattering motes of dying starlight. Blood spills in sanctified arcs. Shadows writhe in fury. The storm collapses inward, dragging debris, corpses, and broken relics into its spiraling heart. The battlefield becomes a cathedral of apocalypse. Warriors on both sides are hurled like dolls into the abyss. Priests fall to their knees, praying to a god-emperor who remains silent. And at the center of the maelstrom, Titus feels something within himself ignite, a presence long dormant, a truth sealed into his reborn flesh the moment he ascended to Primaris. He feels the Emperor's gaze, not as glory, not as salvation, but as burden, immense, inescapable, and merciless in its duty. It is not love, it is not divinity, it's purpose, brutal and absolute. The revelation sears through him, burning away the last remnants of doubt. His vision whitens, its armor cracks with radiant strain. The creature recoils in terror, for it recognizes the force awakening within him, the echo of a design meant to reshape destiny. Titus channels it with a roar that seems to tear eternity apart. His blade plunges through the creature's chest in a detonation of light and shadow. The storm implodes in a wail that shakes the heavens. Silence falls. Heavy, ash, choked, eternal. Titus collapses to one knee, armor smoking, breath ragged. Around him, the battlefield lies in ruin, corpses and rubble strewn like offerings to a god who refuses to answer. His surviving warriors gather, trembling with awe and uncertainty. None can speak. None can understand what they witnessed. Titus rises slowly, the weight of revelation clinging to him like chains. He feels altered, not merely victorious, not merely alive, changed. Set upon a path he does not yet comprehend. He gazes toward the horizon, where dawn struggles through a blood-red sky. A tremor ripples through reality, small but unmistakable. A warning, a birth, a fracture. And in that moment, across the Voxnet, a single forbidden signal awakens, whispering his name in a voice that should not exist. From the moment the forbidden signal breathed his name across the dying Voxnet, the world seemed to tilt beneath Titus as though the very crust of reality recoiled from recognizing what had awakened within him. The storm had ended, but in its departure it left a silence so immense it swallowed the remaining thunder of artillery and the final cries of the wounded. He walked through that stillness, as though moving through a dream of desolation. Each step guided by instinct rather than certainty. Each breath tugged from lungs that felt older than the age that birthed him. The ruins stretched endlessly around him, shattered reliquaries, scorched marble, broken icons whose faces had melted into expressions too human for saints. The surviving warriors trailed behind him like ghosts, aware they followed a commander who had touched something no mortal should, yet too loyal or too lost to turn away. The shattered battlefield seemed to sigh beneath the weight of its own suffering. Massive pillars lay toppled across the cracked earth, each etched with prayers now blackened beyond recognition. Pools of chemical rain gathered where once fountains of sanctified water had flowed. A single standard, its colors burned to ash, its sigil barely clinging to existence, fluttered in a wind that smelled of smoke and regret. Titus paused before it, his gauntlet brushing the frayed fabric, and a memory stirred. A younger self, certain of the Emperor's plan, certain that duty was a path illuminated rather than carved through endless night. Now he felt only the cold truth that duty was a burden carried into the dark without promise of dawn. The silence around him deepened, as if the battlefield itself mourned the faith sacrificed to survive the storm. Above him, the sky looked bruised, as though struck by the fists of dying gods. Clouds twisted in slow spirals, hiding distant fires that flickered like the embers of a galaxy too exhausted to burn. The wounded limped through the ruins, whispering litanies not for strength, but for forgiveness, from whom none could say, "No, no, no, no." Chaplains gathered the fallen into rows, their croziest staffs trembling as they recited rites from torn scriptures. In their voices, Titus heard not authority, but grief. He wondered if any of them still truly believed their words carried beyond the veil of death, or if they spoke simply because silence would break them. The thought unsettled him more deeply than any blade, that faith, once a fortress, had become a fragile relic they carried out of habit, cracked but too sacred to discard. As he moved deeper into the ruins, Titus felt a presence lingering at the edges of perception, a faint echo, like fingertips brushing the fabric of thought. It was not the creature he had slain. Its essence had been cast screaming into oblivion. This was something gentler, older, a whisper of recognition from the hidden corners of the warp. He did not understand it, and he feared trying. His armor hummed softly, resonating with faint traces of the power that had ignited during his battle. He tried to summon it again, to grasp its shape, but it slipped through him like starlight through broken glass. Whatever had awakened remained coiled in shadow, watching him with patience that felt almost sorrowful. And he wondered, for the first time, whether his transformation had been triumph or curse. Night descended slowly, cloaking the ruins in violet gloom. Fires smoldered in distant trenches, casting long, skeletal shadows across ruined cathedrals, whose spires leaned like penitent giants. Titus watched the horizon fade, his thoughts wandering through the labyrinth of revelation and loss. His warriors gathered around makeshift pyres, speaking in hushed tones, sharing memories of brothers who would never rise again. Their laughter was brittle, their words fragmented by exhaustion. Titus listened, feeling the weight of their trust settle upon him like a mantle woven from unseen chains. He wondered if they sensed the truth he dared not speak, that in the moment of victory, something within him had ceased to be entirely his own. The night deepened, and the ruins seemed to breathe with the slow, heavy cadence of morning. At dawn, the world emerged pale and trembling. A thin mist drifted across the battlefield, coiling around armor plates and broken monoliths like the ghosts of forgotten prayers. Titus moved through it, as though wading through memory, steps stirring visions from his past. Battles fought with righteous certainty. Oaths sworn without hesitation. Victories that once felt like the Emperor's blessing. Now, each memory tasted of ash. He stopped before a crater where warp lightning had scorched the ground into glass. Reflected in its surface, he saw his own face, older, wearier, carved with lines he did not remember earning. But behind his eyes he saw something else, a flicker of light coiled deep within, waiting, watching. He turned away from the reflection, unsettled by the realization that the greatest battle he faced might be against what now lived inside him. A remembrancer approached, her robes torn, her face streaked with dust and dried tears. She bowed, not in reverence, but in gratitude for survival. In her trembling hands, she carried a data slate filled with damaged recordings, fragments of the battle. Glimpses of Titus, illuminated by impossible radiance. Moments of victory that looked more like divine wrath. She asked permission to chronicle what she had seen, her voice a whisper as though afraid the ruins themselves might object. Titus nodded, though he did not know why. Perhaps some part of him wanted the truth preserved, even if he no longer understood it. She thanked him quietly and asked a single question before departing. Was it the Emperor who touched you, or something born of our own desperation? Titus could not answer. She left before he could attempt one. Hours passed. The survivors prepared their dead for transport, collecting shattered armor plates and cooling ceramite fragments with reverence. Titus climbed what remained of a cathedral tower. Its upper half collapsed into a ruin of stone, and fractured iconography. From this vantage, he watched his warriors move among the debris, like caretakers in a graveyard too vast to comprehend. The wind carried distant hymns, soft, uncertain, wavering like candlelight in a storm. He felt the weight of centuries press upon him, the realization that victory had not ended their suffering, only deepened their questions. He closed his eyes and let the cold wind wash over him. In the quiet, he wondered, what remains of faith when its foundations crack? What remains of purpose when truth reveals itself as a shifting, wounded thing? As evening fell, the sky flared with the dying light of distant shipwrecks burning in orbit. Their flames rained faint embers that dissolved before touching the ground, as though the heavens themselves shed tears too weary to fall fully. Titus descended the broken tower and walked alone toward the battlefield's edge. There he found a single servo skull, sparking weakly, reciting half-corrupted liturgies in a trembling voice. He knelt, not to repair it, but to listen to a machine desperately clinging to memory, reciting fragments of devotion it no longer understood. Its voice faltered, then stilled. Titus closed its remaining eyelids with a gentle touch. The gesture surprised him. It felt like laying a hand on the brow of a dying child. And in that moment, he realized how deeply the galaxy hungered for mercy it did not know how to ask for. Darkness reclaimed the land once more. Titus made camp beside the remains of a shattered transport, its hull still warm from the storm's fury. He did not sleep. Instead, he stared into the cold embers of a dying fire, listening to the low hum of the power field that pulsed irregularly within his armor. I wondered how long he could contain what dwelled beneath his skin. How long he could pretend that he remained the same captain who had once rallied soldiers with unwavering faith. The fire crackled, casting faint sparks that spiraled upward like the final prayers of the forgotten. He whispered an oath into the quiet, not to victory, not to destiny, but to endurance. And for the first time, he felt the whisper within him stir, as if acknowledging his resolve. At dawn's first pale glow, reinforcements arrived, not in triumph, but in solemn procession. Gunships descended through the mist like weary angels, their engines sighing rather than roaring. Sergeants stepped out first, surveying the devastation with expressions carved from granite and sorrow. They approached Titus with cautious reverence, unsure whether to salute him as a hero or regard him as something newly born and still undefined. Titus returned their gestures with measured calm, concealing the tremor within his gauntlets. Reports were exchanged, casualties tallied, decisions made. Yet through it all, he felt the whisper inside him pulse with quiet anticipation, as though aware that the galaxy had begun to shift around him imperceptibly, inevitably, irrevocably. By twilight, the battlefield lay empty. The dead had been carried away, the living had departed for new wars. Only Titus remained, standing among the ruins like a lone sentinel guarding the grave of an empire's forgotten dreams. He gazed at the scorched horizon, where smoke drifted like the final breath of worlds. The wind carried faint echoes, not words, but impressions. A question, a warning, a promise. He closed his eyes and let the last of the day's warmth fade from his armor. Somewhere in the quiet, he felt the universe pause, as though holding its breath, waiting for him to take a step that would shape what came next. And in that pause, two questions rose like solemn specters. What does it mean to endure when hope has long since burned to ash? And who bears the burden of truth in a galaxy built on necessary lies? As the stars emerged like cold candles in an endless cathedral, Titus turned away from the ruins. The whisper within him settled into silence, not gone, but watchful. He walked forward, each step carrying him into a future no prophecy could predict, no chronicle could contain. Behind him, the battlefield faded into shadow, the ruins becoming a memory the galaxy would one day deny, then rediscover, then fear. His silhouette merged with the twilight, steady, solitary, unbroken. And as he vanished into the gathering dark, the remembrancer's voice echoed softly, recording the final lines of the chronicle. Some wars end. Others merely change their shape. Some warriors become the question the galaxy does not dare to answer. If you have walked these ruins with me, if you have felt the silence, the sorrow, the weight of a warrior's burden, then stand witness. Like, subscribe, share, and let your voice join the chronicle in the comments below.